Sailors, what's the creepiest, scariest, or most unnerving thing you've seen/witnessed while at sea? Dad and grandparents all lived on a boat. We are from southern part of China. So when I say boat, I mean those huge ass ones from back in the days, like pirate ships big. Family of 18 lived on this boat. They would fish back and forth from China to Vietnam, now known as the parts where China is trying to take over from other countries and build a man-made islands. Anyways, Dad said sirens, aka people in the water singing to lure you in, are real. He said he and others has seen or heard them. It's how my eldest aunt drowned according to him. My other aunts also said that's how she drowned. But never actually give out a story. They all knew each other's voices. And if they heard singing that didn't sound like any of them, they knew to cover their ears and head back down below. Thus the banging on the pots and pans to scare them away. They even went to get fireworks to scare them away. Sometimes they would have a high-pitched scream. They tried everything to get rid of it. They even thought throwing fish back into the water would be an offering. But that didn't work. When my aunt drowned, my grandfather became a more abusive alcoholic. My dad said many times he thought of pushing his dad over and just blamed it on the sirens. But was too scared what my grandpa would do if he survived the fall into the water. I've asked about this story so many times, but it never ever changes. When stories don't change, you know there's truth. And when everyone else's account to the same story that's also the same, then you know it's the truth. They all said they heard or seen it. Just a person in the water when there shouldn't be anyone else. They didn't look like they were in distress. More so that they were just taking a nice relaxing swim and that you should be in there with them. They made the water seem so enticing. Yup. That was my dad's story, my grandma's story, my mom's story, and even my grandpa's story. They all said the same thing. Former technician in the Navy. While on operation, can't recall if it was in the Caribbean or Arctic, that particular ship I was on did a lot of sailing. We were performing daily system operability tests on the Seawiz. https://n.m.wikipedia.org/wiki/phalanx_Seawiz, which is used to defend against incoming missiles and certain surface threats. The Seawiz has its own radar system for identifying and tracking threat targets, as well as an infrared camera system so that operators in the ops room, and techs/secondary operators in the maintenance area, can see what it is seeing. While performing these tests in the middle of the night, my supervisor and I observed a white hot object flying through the sky. We had control of the Seawiz as we were performing our tests, whereas normally the ops room operators would have control, and we manually acquired a thermal lock on the target. For the life of me I cannot recall the altitude or speed of the object, but whatever it was at the time would have been within the capabilities of our main radar systems to detect. We called to the ops room and reported that we have an unidentified air target, but they reported back that nothing was on any radar system. Literally nothing around us for 100 miles or more. We continued to monitor its thermal signature for a few minutes before the object made an abrupt change of bearing, one that shouldn't be possible given the speed, and we lost thermal lock. We manually scanned and found it again, regaining thermal lock. After following for a few more moments, it simply disappeared. No idea what it could have been. The thermal camera isn't very high definition, but you can make out general shapes of craft most of the time. You can tell a helicopter from other types of aircraft, for example. This object, however, was just two round balls of heat rotation around each other. It really freaked us out and is unlike anything we've seen before. We stayed up discussing what it could be, and of course aliens was brought up. TLDR, Naval Weapon System picked up an unusual object on thermal camera in the middle of the night, high rate of speed, unlike any craft we have seen, undetectable by radar, simply disappeared off thermal in the blind of an eye. It isn't all that weird, I guess. When I was in the Navy we ran into the second largest pod of dolphins in the world. This was in the Western Pacific. Anyway, they were a fun-loving bunch and, like many fish, followed us because we dumped food over the side while underway. As we sailed, the dolphins formed a line on our port side and would take turns diving under the prow, then the line would make its way aft along the starboard around and repeat. They did this for a couple of hours before breaking off and going wherever they go. Sorta like a conga line. A few of us were TDY to the USNS Tulagi for 10 days, where we saw the most amazing school of flying fish. They would swim alongside and dozens at a time would come out of the water and fly along. It was one of the most spectacular natural things I've ever witnessed. I wish I had had the history of that ship when I was on her. The Tulagi was from World War II and had survived being hit by the kamikazes. Typhoons were the scariest part. We had to sail through 2 during monsoon season. It was a good-sized ship, 300 feet long with 15 feet of freeboard and 4 decks above the weather deck. They tied off lines on the main deck so the engineering section could get their soundings from the ports in the deck. This told them how much water was in the bilges and the holds. These were maybe 3 holes with a cap, and a weighted line was dropped. The boys had to clip onto the line for safety as the swells were 30 to 40 feet. You could get your face washed standing on the flying bridge. That's 50 feet above the sea. We would rise on the wave peaks and you could see the world, then we would fall into the troughs and all you could see was ocean above you, way above. We sat literally in a bowl of water and that is all you could see. It was pretty much agreed on the realization of how puny and powerless we truly are in face of nature. I know dolphins are mammals. USS Haleakala 25. Recreational sailor. Went on a 3-week open water trip with a bunch of complete strangers when we were all about 17. One night there was a bad storm, but I was captaining and we were fine. It was probably around 2 a.m. when one of the girls in the crew saw an SOS signal not far away, so we went to go check it out. It was one man on a tiny old power boat that's basically meant to island hop around the BVI or places like that. Every piece of equipment had been destroyed in the storm and this man had zero control. Of course we brought him on board and took him where he needed to go, which was hours in the opposite direction that his boat was headed. This has a happy story, but if my crew hadn't seen the smallest signal light that was half covered by waves, that man wouldn't have survived to see the sun again. Many years ago a family friend took me out to sea for the first time. Never have I been fishing or on a boat and always wanted to go. We went out into the Gulf of Mexico, according to him, about 3 or so miles out. We just planned to hang out on the boat half the day. Fish a little. Well, you know how when you're in a field or big open space, like the ocean, and a cloud above approaches, you can see its shadow on the ground/water? Well, I see that. Maybe stretched a few hundred feet wide. I mentioned to my friend about how cool it was that we can see an entire cloud's shadow coming at us out in the ocean. Then I looked up to see which cloud it was. There was none. It was a clear blue day. The only clouds I could see was in the horizon far off. That's strange. I suggested that maybe we were just moving toward a high area of land, just a few feet deep. He said no, because we are anchored. Now both of our hearts drop. It's approaching us fast. We are laughing hysterically out of pure amazement and confusion. Now it's maybe 30 feet away. We are due it on the right side of it. As soon as the shadow begins to pass under us, the boat gets yanked hard. I fell on my back and my friend was holding onto a rail and didn't fall. The boat settled and the shadow continued to move past. It eventually turned to the right and went out to sea. Friend and I are freaking out and decide to just leave. He goes to pull the anchor up, but there is no anchor. Just the part where the anchor was attached and it's ripped off. Damaged. Whatever that thing was clipped the chain and ripped it off without slowing down at all. That's why the boat yanked. Again, it was huge. If I had to compare it to something, I would say maybe a tad bigger than a football field. As for shape, eggish. It was oval. So the front end was sort of rounded but more pointed than the back. Imagine the shadow of a giant egg with the top facing you. We still have no leads on what kind of animal is that big and can just bump into an anchor and rip it off like it was made of butter. Mine was just weird. It's midnight and I'm aft lookout, back of the ship lookout, and I'm actually in the hello control tower because well I was just tired of standing in the back. Shitbag noises. I was joined with my friend who was deep into Candy Crush. Conversation dies down, I look out back and I just see this brilliant blue light up the sky. It looked surreal, like it fell from the heavens. It just lit up everything and fell what looked like from to sky to over the horizon. Imagine looking into a baby blue light bulb, that's what it was like. There seemed to be an aura following it, but maybe that was just light. I called it into the bridge as an aerial contact and of course they showed nothing on their end. Friend was too ass deep in Candy Crush to notice. Well, so up here in Minnesota many of us have lake homes. Every summer this couple moors their modest houseboat off our shore to watch the 4th of July fireworks. The night before it is dead calm, I mean no wind, water is like glass and it's hot as hell at 1 AM. I wake up to hear this moaning sound, nudge my wife and she hears it too. We throw on a robe and walk outside. Sure enough the houseboat couple is going at it and his wife is audibly very appreciative. Sound was traveling so well across the lake that both my neighbors came out too. When they finished we gave them a healthy round of applause. The guy pops his head out and even gave us a wave. Best part was they were easily in their 50s and still going strong. Not creepy or scary but funny nonetheless. One of my Navy deployments I had the deck, meaning I was in charge of the overall safety of the ship, where it was going, what it was doing, and we had literally just exited the Turkish Straits and showed up in the Black Sea. We were there to do presence ops, aka stick our tongues out at Russian warships and say hey, these are international waters and we're allowed to do this and we know it pisses you off but here we are. Sort of like sitting in the back seat with a sibling and going I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you. Anyways, it's nighttime and pitch black. Suddenly we notice that a ship on our radar has suddenly picked up immense speed and changed course to head full tilt right at us. Going about 35 kts, pretty much our top speed. Between our intel, the visuals we're getting in the dark, only running lights of different colors, the ship's electronic signature, we figure out that yay, it's definitely a Russian warship. So we also pick up speed. I order engineering to bring another engine online, and say fuck it, let's go to general quarters, basically make the ship ready for battle. I knew that there was no way Russia was going to actually start a war over this, but wasn't taking any chances. This all happened in maybe 2 minutes. Anyways, they also course corrected to interceptors, still hurtling along at 35 knots. We're making bridge calls to them, politely asking them our WTF mate, which they don't answer. Anyways, at the last friggin' second they pull a quick 180 and start heading back the other direction. Which kicked off us playing chicken with Russia for the next 2 weeks, in which this exact scenario happening multiple times. It was stupid because we actually have international rules in place to avoid this sort of thing from happening with Russia, but I guess they decided to ignore them. Scariest for me was getting violently awoken by a deafening bang and a huge roll. I was a submariner in the US Navy. I was asleep and woke up instantly after hearing a loud noise. The boat took a huge roll in one direction and an even bigger roll the other direction. Then the boat started going down. I thought, this was it, my life is ending shortly. I grabbed my poppy suit and started to run off to the propulsion train. I passed crew's mess and shit was everywhere. A few folks were bleeding and holding their heads. I went and looked for any flooding. Luckily, we just had a collision with a Norwegian gas tanker and the protocol is to go deep after a collision. I was a nuke and didn't know those procedures. No major injuries, but we had to pull into Italy for repairs that took a month. We were on a glass-bottom boat tour in Hawaii once, in Hanauma Bay, and were headed to an area well known for humpback whales to gather, breed and nurse. The tour operator said they weren't allowed to approach closer than 100, but there were often large groups of whales in the area, so the chances of seeing a couple were very high. When the boat was in transit there was a stream of agitated water under the hull so you couldn't see anything. I thought the whole glass bottom thing was a scam until we stopped moving, then the view was incredible. The water was a beautiful blue and visibility seemed unlimited. We had stopped over top of a reef of sorts and the diversity of sea life was amazing. The tour operator, who was a grizzled old islander and a dark shade of brown, was on the PA describing the amazing sights below our feet. He spoke with the laid-back chilled-out voice you'd expect from a guy whose job was being on vacation in Hawaii. We hadn't seen any humpbacks up close though, just a few breaches a long way off, when suddenly the view in the glass bottom was obscured by bubbles. A whale had swum, at high speed, right under the boat. Then another, and another, and another, a conveyor belt of whales. They started rubbing up against and bumping into the boat. I don't know how big or long the boat was, maybe 75, held about 100 people, but the impacts were enough to make us slide around on the plastic benches. Everyone was looking down through the glass bottom, but I glanced up for a second and we were surrounded, on all sides, by whales 8 or 10 deep. At first the tour operator was gushing with excitement, saying this had never happened to him in 30 years, how lucky we were, how amazing it was. He said the whales were 45, 60 long and could weigh 40 tons. They were so graceful for their size, all covered in barnacles. It was great fun, the whales seemed quite playful. Then the bumping intensified to the point where all the passengers were sliding on the plastic benches, crashing into one another and a few fell onto the floor. People were screaming and children were crying. Obvious fear started creeping into the tour operator's voice, and that fear percolated down to the tourists. Eventually he stopped talking, and we all just resigned ourselves to our fate. You realize at that moment how small and helpless you are, and how big and wild Mother Nature is. It went on and on, for about 20 minutes, so long it wasn't even fun anymore. The whales seemed to be terrorizing us. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, they disappeared. Literally 1 second we were engulfed in a melee and the next second we were alone on the ocean. The boat captain started the engines and we headed back to the shore. Everyone sat in stunned silence, husbands consoled wives, women comforted children, not even the tour operator spoke for the 30-minute journey back to shore. As we approached the dock he came back on the pier with his sales pitch about recommending him to others, but his voice was still pretty shaky. I thought, it probably takes a lot to rattle that guy, we were probably in more danger than we knew.